I arrived at Aunt Patricia's mansion around 6 o'clock, just as the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. I didn't care for these monthly family dinners, but I'd long ago stopped making excuses. I had learned that missing one would mean hearing about it for the next month. As I walked through the grand entrance, Aunt Patricia was already greeting everyone with her usual enthusiasm, flitting around in her glittery dress like some sort of over-energized butterfly. The smell of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and something sweet wafted through the air. Everyone was here, as usual. Uncle Gerald, who always had a sarcastic remark for anything, my cousin Marcus with his overly slick hair and tech company talk, and the other assorted relatives who loved to comment on my every move. "Olivia," Aunt Patricia's voice cut through the chatter, and she was by my side in an instant, giving me an air kiss. "So good to see you, darling. How's everything going? Still not working, I assume?" I gave a tight smile, nodding in acknowledgement. "I'm doing great, Aunt Patricia. Keeping busy." Her smile flickered, just for a second. "Busy, huh? You know, Marcus here just got promoted to junior associate at that big tech company. So proud of him. I'm sure you'll catch up eventually." Marcus, sitting across the table with his chin tilted upward, made a small noise of agreement. "You know, Olivia, tech is where the real future lies. It's not like the old days where you could just hang around doing nothing. I could have set you up at the company, but, well, you didn't want the job." I didn't respond immediately, instead focusing on my water glass, swirling the liquid. I'd heard this speech too many times. Marcus didn't know that the company he worked for, the one he thought was so impressive, was about to be acquired by mine, Shadow Technologies, without him even knowing. It was a cruel joke to think he was ahead of me, when in reality, I was already miles beyond him. "Shadow Technologies," I whispered under my breath, almost amused by the thought. "Oh, Marcus," Aunt Patricia continued, clearly thrilled with the conversation. "Tell Olivia all about the tech industry. She could learn so much from you." Marcus leaned back in his chair, the smugness dripping from every word. "Well, Olivia, you know, the market's moving fast. You should really look into coding, get into AI. It's not easy, but if you play your cards right, you can make millions." He smiled, seemingly proud of his unsolicited advice. I could feel the eyes of my family on me, waiting for my response, perhaps anticipating the usual sheepish laugh, or a response that would prove their assumptions about me. I sipped my water slowly, deliberately, and let the silence stretch. Inside, I was laughing. They had no idea what I'd been doing for the past few years. They were too wrapped up in their assumptions about me, unemployed, living off my trust fund, to realize that I was quietly building a $50 billion empire while they scoffed and condescended. And now, the joke was on Marcus. He didn't know that the very company he was working for had already been bought out by Shadow Technologies, and soon I would be his boss's boss. "Sounds interesting," I said with a polite smile, pushing my chair back slightly, trying to get some space from the conversation. But Marcus wasn't done. "Yeah, you really should get into it, Olivia. You're wasting your potential sitting around. You could be making so much more than what you have now." "Right, Marcus, you're probably right," I replied, still sipping my water, feeling the weight of the room's judgment press down on me. They all thought I was wasting my life, that I was some kind of disappointment. They had no clue. The conversation carried on at the dinner table, the hum of chatter filling the room as Aunt Patricia continued her usual critiques. Oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface, she turned to me, a knowing look in her eyes as she brought up one of my life's greatest regrets, at least in her eyes. "So, Olivia," Aunt Patricia began, her voice a little too sweet, "I've been thinking about your decision to forgo Harvard Business School. You know, many of us thought that would have been the perfect next step for you. You could have been running one of those big tech companies by now, instead of, well, whatever it is you're doing." I could feel my family's eyes on me, their unspoken judgments hanging thick in the air. My cousin Marcus, sitting just to my right, seemed ready to give me another round of unsolicited career advice. I didn't even have to glance in his direction to know the look on his face. "Oh, don't listen to her," Marcus piped up, as if he had a monopoly on wisdom. "Coding, right? It's not all it's cracked up to be. You need to think bigger, Olivia. You can't just keep sticking to those small, boring projects. You could be one of us if you wanted. I mean, the job was there, remember? I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. I had heard this from him before, his comments dressed up as concern, but with the undertone of self-righteousness. I shifted my gaze from my untouched plate of food to the front door, thinking about how I could just leave this farce behind. Just as I was about to shift the topic away from my supposed failure, the butler entered with a stack of magazines in his hands. He placed them on the side table by the door, the weight of the magazines echoing in the silence of the room. Aunt Patricia, ever the gossip, immediately dove into the stack, her fingers flipping through the glossy covers like she was sorting through old recipes. I watched as her eyes landed on the top magazine, Fortune magazine. She opened it quickly, eager to skim through the contents. The moment she saw the cover, she froze. It wasn't the usual celebrity face on the cover. Instead, there was my face, smiling confidently back at her, her lips parted in shock. "Olivia?" Her voice wavered slightly, but I could hear the disbelief laced within it. The headline on the cover screamed louder than anything she could have said. Olivia Grace Sterling, youngest tech billionaire, reshapes artificial intelligence. The room went dead quiet. My family, usually full of conversation and opinion, was suddenly speechless. Aunt Patricia looked at the cover, then back at me, her eyes wide, as if she had just seen a ghost. "Wait, this is—" Aunt Patricia's words faltered. "Olivia, this can't be right." I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. Slowly, I placed my fork down and looked around at their stunned faces. For once, the tables had turned. "Yes, Aunt Patricia," I said coolly, letting the words sink in. "It's true. I've been building a business. Shadow Technologies. I guess you could say I've been a little busy." The tension in the room spiked, and I could see the realization dawning on their faces, especially Marcus, whose jaw had dropped slightly. Aunt Patricia's face flushed, her mind clearly struggling to catch up with the sudden shift in the conversation. She trailed off, her voice weak. But you never told us." I didn't need to tell them. They never asked. They'd assumed I was nothing more than the family disappointment, living off my trust fund while they relentlessly criticized my every decision. "Yes," I continued, my voice steady. "I've been quietly building a $50 billion empire. While you all mocked me for not joining Marcus's little tech company, I've been working on something a bit bigger." There it was, the sting, and just as they were starting to recover from the shock of my success, I threw in the final punch. "Oh, and by the way," I added, my eyes turning to Marcus, who was still staring at me as if I had slapped him, "I should mention that Marcus's company, the one he's so proud of, was acquired by Shadow Technologies earlier today. His company's being restructured, and now—" I let the words hang in the air like a heavy curtain. "Marcus reports to me." The silence that followed was suffocating. My family, who had always seen me as the underachiever, the one who couldn't get it together, was now faced with the reality that I had quietly been succeeding beyond their wildest imaginations. I could see Marcus's face turn a shade of red, his pride and arrogance crumbling beneath the weight of my revelation. Aunt Patricia's eyes flicked between me and Marcus, her voice finally breaking through the silence. This isn't possible." She wasn't speaking to me. She was speaking to herself, trying to process the unexpected truth. I took a slow breath, leaning back in my chair. "It is, Patricia. I've been working hard while you've been busy thinking I was just a lazy trust fund kid. Now let's talk about the future." The next part would be just as fun as watching them squirm. The room was still. The silence after my revelation hung thick, suffocating, like the calm before a storm. My family had always looked at me like I was some sort of oddity, a dreamer with no real ambition, a woman living off a trust fund, waiting for her life to somehow fall into place. But now, as I looked at their stunned faces, I realized how much they had underestimated me. I let the silence linger for a moment, allowing the weight of my words to settle in. It was a sweet feeling, knowing that for once, I wasn't the one scrambling to explain myself. They were the ones trying to reconcile their image of me with the reality I'd just laid bare. "So to recap," I began, leaning forward slightly, enjoying the discomfort they were all clearly feeling. "Marcus's company, the one he was so proud of, well, it was just acquired by Shadow Technologies earlier today. We've restructured it, and now Marcus reports to me. He's working under my boss's boss, Marcus's face twisted into an uncomfortable grimace, and I could practically see the mental gears turning in his head, trying to comprehend what this meant for his career. But he wasn't the only one struggling to process this new reality. My aunt, uncle, even my parents, none of them could quite seem to look at me the same way anymore. I decided to keep pressing forward, letting them feel the full force of what I was about to reveal. I'm sure you're all wondering how exactly this happened, I continued, my voice calm but cutting. Well, I've been building this empire quietly, while you all were busy assuming I was just biding my time. You all thought I was the family disappointment, didn't you? The one who couldn't make anything of herself. But while you were looking down on me, I was changing the world. Aunt Patricia opened her mouth, probably to argue or express some kind of disbelief, but I held up a hand, cutting her off before she could get a word in. Let's put that aside for a second. I have a question for all of you. How many of you thought I would never amount to anything? How many of you mocked my decision to work in coding and technology, calling it a waste of time? You know, for years, I heard it from all of you, but none of you saw what I was building. None of you believed in me, except for Grandma. I paused here, letting their confusion intensify. I live on the entire top floor of Sterling Tower, by the way, I added casually, as if the statement was just a throwaway fact. And my car, the custom-made prototype I drive, it's worth more than this mansion. There it was, the admission of the wealth and success I'd built, and the look on their faces was priceless. Uncle Gerald, who had always treated me like a child, now had his mouth slightly ajar, his eyes darting between me and the luxury around him. My cousin Emma blinked in disbelief. Unable to mask her surprise, I leaned back, crossing my arms as I savored the moment, watching as they all scrambled to reconcile their preconceived notions of me with the person sitting in front of them. And you know what else, I added, my voice deliberately slow. Grandma, my mother's mother, she believed in me when no one else did. She saw something in me that none of you did. You all mocked the idea of me working in tech. You called me foolish for not following the conventional path, for turning down Harvard Business School. But I'm the one who built Shadow Technologies. I'm the one who turned down those traditional paths because I knew where the real future lay. I looked around at the faces in front of me, each one struggling to understand how they had missed something so obvious. Aunt Patricia, for all her posh airs and judgment, looked like she might faint. My mother was pale, her eyes darting between me and my father, who just sat there, stunned into silence. The worst part, I added with a sly smile, you all thought you were smarter than me, but in the end, I'm the one who's reshaping the tech world. And now, Marcus, I'm the one who gets to lead the charge. I let those words settle like a weight on their chests. The power had shifted. They were no longer the ones looking down on me. Now, they were the ones who had to contend with the fact that the family disappointment had turned into a tech billionaire, one who had far surpassed all their expectations. The room was still buzzing with the shock of my revelation, the silence a strange weight that pressed down on us all. I could see their minds racing, trying to catch up with what I'd just told them. Marcus was still staring at me like I'd just punched him in the gut, and Aunt Patricia, ever the conversationalist, was fumbling with her napkin as if it might give her the answers she needed. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment, and then, with a calmness that only heightened the tension, I spoke again. Now that we've got all that out of the way, it's time to talk about the next steps, because as it stands, you're all looking at me in a way that suggests you don't quite know what to do with this information. I glanced around the table, letting the moment stretch. Here's the deal. You can either continue to live as you have, carrying on with your usual lives, or you can join me at Shadow Technologies. The gasps that followed weren't unexpected. It was clear that none of them had seen this coming. The idea of starting fresh, building something from the ground up in my world, was one they weren't ready for, but I wasn't giving them an option to back out quietly. Joining me means you'll have to earn your place at the company. No family connections, no special treatment. You'll start at the bottom, just like everyone else, I continued. But if you can prove yourself, I'll make sure you have every opportunity to rise. I could feel their discomfort, their hesitation, but I wasn't done yet. Marcus, I'm sure this sounds like a real slap in the face, considering the position you had at your old company, but your job no longer exists. You're going to have to start over. Marcus shifted in his seat, clearly rattled. I could practically see the wheels turning in his head, but there was nothing he could do. The acquisition was final, and Shadow Technologies wasn't going to let him, let alone anyone else, coast through. "That's not all," I said, tapping the edge of my glass with a finger. "I've put together personalized folders for each of you. Inside, you'll find an assessment of your current financial situations, as well as a glimpse of what your future could look like if you choose to join Shadow Technologies." I passed the folders around the table, watching as they took them with varying degrees of reluctance. I could practically hear the gears grinding in their minds. "Some of you might not like what's inside," I said, my tone sharp but not unkind. "Emma, I'm sure you're already concerned about relocating. The company's development campus is in Montana, and you'd need to learn the business from scratch, but it's a real opportunity for growth, and you'll be in an environment where merit means everything." Emma, always the one to worry about her social media presence, furrowed her brows as she opened her folder. I could see the skepticism on her face. "I don't know," she said slowly. "Relocating is one thing, but the idea of starting from scratch, I'm not sure I can handle that." I met her gaze. "You're free to stay where you are, Emma, but that means you'll continue the same path you've been on. You've had your life handed to you so far. How about trying something different? Prove to me, to yourself, that you can build something that matters." She looked at the folder again, the weight of my words clearly sinking in. "Look," I said, shifting my gaze to the others. "This isn't just about money or status. It's about building something meaningful. We're changing the world here, and you can either be part of that change, or you can keep living the way you always have." I could see my words hitting their mark. The idea of starting from scratch, building their careers from the ground up, was a challenge they'd never considered, but the longer they sat with the idea, the more it started to sink in that they might not have a choice. The life they'd been leading, based on connections and social status, wasn't going to get them anywhere in the world I was building. "Think it over," I added, leaning back in my chair. "But know this, if you join me, you'll have to prove you belong, and if you don't want to, well, the door's always open. But don't come back to me asking for help when things don't go the way you expect." The room was quiet, but I could sense the shift. This wasn't just a dinner anymore. This was the turning point. Marcus, never one to back down from a challenge, looked at his folder and then back up at me. "I'll need some time to think about it." I nodded, meeting his eyes. "Take all the time you need, Marcus. But remember, time's a luxury none of us can afford." Aunt Patricia, who had been quiet up until this point, cleared her throat. "What exactly do you mean by starting from the bottom?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. I met her eyes, enjoying the subtle vulnerability in her tone. "Exactly what I said. No more special treatment, no more connections. You'll earn your place just like everyone else, and if you can't handle that, then maybe you should think about whether you really want to be a part of what we're building." I leaned back, watching as the rest of the family processed the challenge I'd laid before them. None of them were used to being told no. None of them were used to earning their place. But now the stakes were higher. Now it was about real innovation, real effort. And if they wanted in, they would have to prove they were capable. And if they couldn't, well, they could stay where they were, stuck in the world of social status and family connections. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone sat around the table, processing the offer I had laid out for them. For years, I had been the family disappointment, the one they all assumed would never amount to anything. Now I was offering them a chance to be part of the empire I had built, on my terms. They could either join Shadow Technologies at the ground level and prove themselves, or remain in their comfortable, predictable lives. Always looking from the outside in, Uncle Gerald was the first to react. He looked at the folder I had handed him with a mix of disbelief and pride. I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head as he weighed the idea of working for me. But after a moment, he set it down without even glancing at the contents. "I've built my own life, Olivia. I don't need to join your company." "I'll start my own," he said, with the same stubborn pride that had always defined him. I didn't need to say anything. I knew Uncle Gerald's pride wouldn't allow him to accept my offer, even though I had already anticipated his decision. What he didn't know was that Shadow Technologies owned all the patents to the ideas he was currently trying to develop. In the end, he wouldn't be able to compete. "Suit yourself," I said, giving him a small nod, then turned to Marcus. Marcus had been unusually quiet since I had made my offer. I could tell he was struggling, torn between his pride and the reality of his new position. But he was also ambitious. He wasn't about to let his career slip away without putting up a fight. After a long pause, he pulled out his phone and began typing. "I'll take the offer," he said, looking up from his screen. "I want to work my way up, earn my place. If you really have the vision I think you do, then I'll be proud to help make it happen." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. I had expected him to balk at the idea of starting from scratch, especially after the career he'd built for himself at his previous company. But he was a man of ambition, and maybe this was the reality check he needed. "Good choice," I said, giving him a nod of approval. "You'll learn that real innovation isn't about climbing the corporate ladder. It's about building something that lasts, and that starts from the bottom." I could see his pride still flickering in his eyes, but he was choosing the right path, at least for now. Next, my cousin Emma spoke up, her voice hesitant. She wasn't thrilled about the idea of relocating, and I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to figure out a way to make this work without completely disrupting her life. "I'll do it, but there's one condition," she said, looking at me carefully. "I want to keep my social media presence. I've built it up for years, and it's part of who I am." I shook my head, crossing my arms. "Emma, I'm offering you a chance to join one of the most innovative companies in the world. And you want to keep your Instagram followers? If you're going to be part of Shadow Technologies, you're going to need to follow the rules. Privacy and confidentiality are top priorities, no exceptions." Her face fell slightly, but she didn't argue. She knew it was a fair condition. "All right," she said, sighing deeply. "I'll do it. But I expect you to at least acknowledge the work I've done outside of your company." "I'll acknowledge it when it's earned," I said flatly. "But until then, you'll be treated just like anyone else." Lastly, Aunt Patricia had been unusually quiet, her eyes flicking from one family member to another as if searching for some sort of support or approval. When no one spoke up, she turned to me with a look that was part shame, part curiosity. "I've spent my life focusing on appearances," she said softly. "I've always been so caught up in the social world, in what people think of me. But now I see that I've been wrong. I don't want a position of power. I want to learn. I want to understand what you've built, Olivia. I want to know about real innovation." Her words caught me off guard. Aunt Patricia had always been the one to care about the right people, the status symbols, the social events. She had never shown any interest in learning about technology or the work that went into making something like Shadow Technologies a reality. But now, here she was, asking to be a part of something real. "I'll start from the bottom," she continued, her voice quiet but firm, "if you'll teach me." I looked at her for a long moment, my thoughts turning. She had underestimated me for years, but something about her request felt genuine. If she was willing to truly learn, I could show her the ropes, teach her what it really meant to innovate. "I'll teach you," I said, "but you'll have to earn your place, just like everyone else." Aunt Patricia nodded, and for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of respect for her. As I looked around the table, I could see the weight of my offer sinking in. Each of them had a choice to make, and none of them could walk away unscathed. Some of them would take the plunge, and others would refuse. But the ripple effect of my success had already begun to change the way they saw me. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was about merit. This was about proving that real success wasn't about connections or status, but about what you could build from the ground up. The following morning, I found myself standing in the middle of my office at Sterling Tower, overlooking the skyline as the city slowly woke up. I had already gotten a few emails from family members, all of them responding to the ultimatum I had issued the night before. But it was Aunt Patricia who surprised me the most. She hadn't called. She didn't text. She didn't need to. She just showed up. The door to my office opened quietly, and I turned to see her standing there, looking, well, different. Gone was the usual glam of high-end designer outfits and pearls. Instead, she was wearing a simple business suit. Nothing flashy, nothing ostentatious. It was almost as if she had come to play the part, to leave behind everything that had defined her for so long. She stood in the doorway, her posture a little uncertain, her face softer than I had ever seen it. "Olivia," she started, her voice quieter than usual, laced with a hint of hesitation. I owe you an apology." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "I've spent so many years focused on the wrong things, on appearances, on what people think. I've judged you so harshly for making decisions I didn't understand, and I see now that I was wrong. I've underestimated you all these years." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I felt the weight of her sincerity. I had expected her to fight back, to make excuses, to point fingers, but she wasn't doing that. "I want to learn," she said finally, her eyes meeting mine. "I want to understand what you've done here. I want to see it for myself. I've spent too long caring about things that don't matter." I studied her for a moment, unsure of how to respond. This was not the Aunt Patricia I knew. The woman who had looked down on me, who had dismissed my dreams and ambitions, was now standing before me, humbled, asking to learn. She wasn't just asking for forgiveness. She was asking for a chance to truly understand what I had built. "You want to understand innovation?" I asked, almost skeptical. "You want to learn how to build something meaningful?" She nodded, the look on her face one of resolve, not the usual fleeting uncertainty that I was used to seeing in her. "I do," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm willing to start from the bottom. I don't want a position of power. I want to learn from you, from the work, from the real value of what you've created here. I'm ready to change." I didn't know whether to be impressed or cautious. It was one thing to admit you were wrong. It was another to follow through on that admission. But there was something in her tone, in the way she stood before me now, that made me believe she was being genuine. "All right," I said finally, breaking the silence. "Follow me." I led her out of my office, down the long corridors of Sterling Tower, toward the hidden lab that had become the heart of shadow technologies. The lab was far from the public eye, protected behind multiple layers of security and innovation. It was a place where the real magic happened, where my team and I had been developing the AI systems and technology that were reshaping industries. Aunt Patricia followed closely, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor as she took in her surroundings. We stopped in front of a large glass wall that separated the main floor from the labs, and I gestured to the bustling space inside. People were working in the lab, engineers typing furiously at computers, scientists discussing findings, and analysts poring over data. "This is where we push boundaries," I said, watching her closely. "This is where we build the future. This isn't about looking successful. This is about making a real impact." Aunt Patricia's eyes wandered over the room, her gaze lingering on the advanced systems, the neural networks displayed on the walls, and the cutting-edge technology humming in the background. She took it all in, her mouth slightly open in awe. "I never realized," she started, her voice almost a whisper. "I didn't understand how far-reaching this really is. How different it is from what I've known. I've been so blinded by the superficial, by the social circles and the shiny things, that I never even considered the power of real innovation." I watched her carefully, noting the way her posture had softened. She wasn't just standing in front of the glass wall, observing. She was truly seeing, truly understanding for the first time. "You made the mistake of assuming that this," I gestured to the bustling lab, "was just for tech nerds, that it wasn't worth your time. But what we do here is about more than just coding and machines. It's about creating something that changes lives, something that matters." She looked back at me, her eyes full of both awe and regret. "I wish I'd seen it sooner," she said, her voice quieter now, "but I was too busy chasing the wrong things." "Chasing appearances," I added, my voice firm. "You were too busy trying to fit in, too busy with your social games to see the bigger picture, and now you realize that those things don't matter, but I'm glad you're here." Her expression softened, and for the first time, I could see real respect in her eyes. It was strange to see Aunt Patricia like this, humbled, genuine, eager to learn. But I couldn't deny it. Something about this moment felt right. "Thank you for this," she said, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. "I know I've got a long way to go, but I'm ready to start. I want to understand what real innovation looks like, and I'm willing to work for it." I nodded, offering her a small smile. "Then welcome to the team, Patricia. Let's get to work." For the first time, Aunt Patricia seemed to realize that the real power wasn't in the parties, the image, or the fleeting connections. The real power was in the work, the technology, the ideas, the impact that could change the world. And as she stood there, looking at the lab in front of her, I could see that she was ready to start her journey toward understanding it. The next family dinner wasn't at Aunt Patricia's mansion. Instead, I had invited everyone to my penthouse lab at Sterling Tower. The sleek, cutting-edge technology that surrounded us in the lab felt like a physical manifestation of everything that had shifted in the family dynamics. This dinner wasn't just a gathering, it was a demonstration of how much had changed. As they all trickled into my modern, minimalist space, I could see the skepticism on their faces. This wasn't the same luxurious setting they were accustomed to, the one they could measure their wealth by. No, this was something different, something they hadn't been prepared for. The dinner table, in the center of my high-rise penthouse, was surrounded by glass walls that offered a view of the city's glittering skyline. Uncle Gerald was the first to speak up, as usual, trying to maintain his composure despite everything he had witnessed in the last few days. "I still don't get it, Olivia," he said, glancing at the surroundings with a hint of judgment. "All this tech, all this innovation, it doesn't really feel real. It's a different world than what I know." His tone was sharp, and I could tell he was still trying to hold on to his pride. He refused to see what was right in front of him, the reality of my success. I didn't mind. It was part of who he was, prideful, stubborn. He always believed his way was the only way. "That's the thing, Uncle Gerald," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Real innovation doesn't look like what you're used to. It's not shiny cars and golf club memberships. It's the kind of work you can't always see from the outside, until it's too late." He didn't respond, but I could see his mind working. He wasn't ready to admit I was right. Emma, sitting next to me, eyed the room with her usual apprehension. She had agreed to join Shadow Technologies, but I could tell she still wasn't entirely convinced about leaving her old life behind. Her phone sat next to her on the table, though I noticed she kept glancing at it, as if waiting for a message or a notification to break the silence. I was the one who broke it. "Marcus, how's the transition going?" I asked, turning to him with a slight smile. I already knew he had started his new role at Shadow Technologies, but I enjoyed watching him squirm a little. Marcus, no longer the smug, self-assured man who had belittled me just days before, looked at me with a mix of respect and something else, something I hadn't seen in him before. "It's eye-opening," he admitted. "There's a lot to learn, but I'm starting to see the value of real innovation." "You weren't kidding when you said this place operates differently." I smiled, nodding. "It's all about building something meaningful, not about the image, not about the status. I think you're finally starting to get it." He looked at me thoughtfully, almost apologetically, before he continued, his voice quieter. "Yeah, I get it. It's about creating something that lasts." His admission wasn't just a win for me, it was a moment of self-realization for him. Marcus had always been obsessed with looking successful, with the idea of success that had been spoon-fed to him by society. But now, in this space, he was beginning to understand that success wasn't about the appearance of success. It was about substance. As dinner was served, the conversation shifted. No longer did the talk revolve around the latest social events, the expensive vacations, or the superficial things they used to discuss at family gatherings. Now, the conversation focused on real topics: the struggles of innovation, the complexities of coding, and the immense challenges of learning an entirely new business model. Emma reluctantly spoke up, her voice unsure. "So, how does this actually work? What's the real difference between what we've done so far and what Shadow Technologies is doing?" Her question wasn't unusual. Emma had always been the practical one, the one who needed everything broken down into simple terms. But now she was asking the right question. She was finally starting to understand that the world she had been living in wasn't enough. "The difference, Emma," I explained, "is that we're building for the future. We're not trying to fit into a mold that was created years ago. We're pushing boundaries, whether that's in AI or sustainability or the way we do business. This isn't about being part of the old world. It's about shaping the new one." I noticed that Aunt Patricia, who had been quietly listening in, had finally made her way over to me. She had been holding her tongue since we started the conversation, but now she was looking at me with a different kind of curiosity. She had asked to meet privately the other day, to express her desire to truly understand technology, and it seemed like that conversation had finally clicked for her. I think I understand now, Aunt Patricia said, her voice hesitant but sincere. I've spent so long focusing on the wrong things, the wrong people, the wrong image. I've underestimated you all these years, Olivia, and I see now that I was blind to something bigger. Her words hit me hard. She wasn't just acknowledging her mistake. She was offering something real, growth. I want to learn, she continued, not just about the tech, but about this mindset, the way you think about things. Can you teach me? I looked at her for a long moment. The woman who had once mocked my choices, and now she was asking to learn from me. I had never imagined this moment, but here it was, and I wasn't going to turn it down. Of course, I said. I'll teach you, but you'll need to start at the bottom, just like everyone else. Her face brightened at my words, and I could see a flicker of excitement in her eyes. For the first time, I felt like Aunt Patricia was truly ready to change. She wasn't just asking to be a part of something. She was asking to be part of something real. The evening continued, but the mood had shifted. The family who had once seen me as the disappointment was now questioning their own choices. They were beginning to understand that success wasn't about wealth, appearances, or status. It was about what you could build and what you could contribute to the world. And as I watched my family slowly come to terms with this new reality, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Not for me, though I was proud of what I'd achieved, but for the future we were all about to create together.